Snipers are found in almost every shooter, whether it be a tactical shooter, class-based shooter, a battle royale, or even a game like Splatoon. All of them have at least some type of sniper, either character or weapon. Snipers do fill a role of a long-range, high-burst damage, and this makes them fun to play as, since landing those headshots feels incredibly rewarding. But playing against it, it feels pretty bad. The main reason behind this is, at least in my opinion, the lack of interaction between the person getting sniped and the sniper. The sniper just gets to fire across the map, and unless you have a weapon that can shoot back, you're probably just dead, especially if they landed the headshot. And that's assuming you live to know that they shot at you in the first place. You might just be dead on the initial shot. Now, when it comes to Overwatch's roster, Widowmaker is an exact match for this archetypal sniper, and because of this, she draws both ire and a strong and committed player base. Mechanically skilled players can make some insane plays on her, and create some hype moments, especially in last second clutches, by switching and landing headshot after headshot. Being on the receiving end of that feels awful though. Playing against a Widowmaker who's landing all of their shots is nigh impossible to deal with, especially on maps where Widowmaker is favored. On the other hand, if it's a map where Widow just isn't favored, or you just aren't landing the headshots, Widowmaker feels completely useless. So, given this design, she's pretty harsh. So let's go over what makes her this way and how we can try to fix it. First, before we go into any actual part of her kit, let's just deconstruct what the theme of the character is, because this is important. At the end of the day, Widowmaker is a sniper, an assassin, and to a lesser extent, a sort of femme fatale. What this leads to in gameplay is she has the highest potential burst out of any character, at least a single instance of burst that isn't an ultimate. Obviously, Deadeye deals more damage, but that's not what we're talking about here. She has a 120 base damage at full charge, and a 2.5 times multiplier on the headshot. That means that she does 300 damage to the head. Body shot, 120. Widowmaker also has the longest range out of any hit scan. She has a fall off of 50 to 70 meters, meaning it starts at 50, ends at 70. Most other hit scan have a fall off range of 30 to 50. Cassidy has an even shorter one at 25 to 35. Ashe has 20 to 40 unscoped and 40 to 60 scoped. And finally, Sojourn has a range of 40 to 60 with her rail. The only character with comparable range while still being a hit scan is Ana, and Ana is a support. Don't get me wrong, she does a lot of damage, especially when she picks up the headshot perk, but she doesn't have that damage innately. Now, back to Widowmaker. While her close range SMG isn't awful by any means, it's not great, and generally you're going to want to avoid using that at all costs. You want to be using the sniper on the sniper. It's crazy, I know. Now for her abilities. Venomine feels like a relic of a sort of bygone era of Overwatch, where it made more sense to have a trap on a sniper instead of giving them some sort of mobility option. And that being said, Venomine does do a lot of damage, but it's also pretty easy to deal with just by shooting it. Now for her other ability, the one that most people know, she has a grapple. And, well, it's fairly self-explanatory. You look at a place, you shoot it, and you go to it. Crazy. Then finally, we have her ultimate. Inforesight is a weird ultimate, as it just provides information. This is incredibly useful at high ranks, while being only really useful for the Widowmaker themselves at lower ranks. Regardless, the ultimate itself doesn't really feel that impactful for the Widowmaker player. However, at higher ranks, most teams just ignore the ultimate by not peeking for the duration of it, which is 15 seconds. Next, for her perks, we have a simple one which just reduces the cost of ammo while sniping, bringing it up from 7 sniped to 12. Alternatively, you have one that makes scope shots charge faster for 2 seconds after grappling. This perk actually allows for Widowmaker to play in some slightly different ways, where, hey, if you want to get more aggressive, you can try to land more headshots in a shorter period of time. The main issue with this just comes from the fact that her grapple has such a high cooldown, and you have too low of health, and again, you aren't that effective in close ranges. As for her major perks, she has a major perk that reduces grappling hook's cooldown by up to 4 seconds when landing headshots, and this actually combines really well with the aggressive playstyle of the previous minor perk. However, just like most of her kit, it relies on hitting headshots. And then for the other major perk, you have Venomine, which just becomes a Seeker Mine. It's not great. Even though the mine doesn't disappear, you're dealing less damage, and that's most of the value Venomine provides anyway. It might have some niche uses against stuff like Sombra and Tracer, who might just trigger it and then just recall or translocate or like Reaper Wraith, but it's still not great, and you'd rather just have the higher damage of Venomine usually. So, taking every part of her kit together, you have she is a long-range sniper, and most of her damage comes from landing headshots at full charge while scoped. Her minigun doesn't really do that much. Her Venomine is just kind of damage for flankers. She has a grapple, which is very good, but it's on a very high cooldown because of that. She has less health because she's meant to be a sniper, and then Infrasight just varies in its use depending on how good you and your team and the enemies are when it comes to knowing how to use that knowledge. Now, despite all my complaints, there are some positive aspects to having a character like Widowmaker in the game. The main thing is, she is really the only hit-scan sniper in the game. Ana just isn't a DPS and isn't purely focused on killing the enemy. Don't get me wrong, she does a ton of damage and she's great at DPSing, but that isn't her sole focus. Hanzo is definitely a sniper, but is also a projectile character, so even though he shares many problematic kit design aspects with Widowmaker, such as a slow fire rate, long range, insta-killing headshot, he has a projectile which just makes him less consistent. Ashe is by far the most similar to Widowmaker, as both of them are hit-scan snipers. However, Ashe cannot one-shot headshot, which lessens the sniper fantasy, but it does make her more interactive, and it allows her to have more power injected into other parts of her kit. However, because she just doesn't one-shot headshot, she lacks the full sniper identity that Widowmaker has, which is the main appeal of a sniper for a lot of people. The other main thing I have to give Widowmaker credit for is, well, her hype moments in aura. Watching a Widowmaker click heads to save a round can absolutely be hype. Just think of Fleta on King's Row, or the numerous amounts of pro players that have tried to replicate that sort of just moment. Widowmaker duels are highly entertaining as spectators to watch because of the glass cannon nature of a sniper like Widowmaker. One shot is all it can take in order to blow a team fight wide open for one team. And finally, flick headshots alongside grapple shots. They're just sick to watch and really satisfying to pull off yourself, at least in my opinion. Unfortunately, that is the last of the positive aspects I have to add, and now it's time for me to complain about what Widowmaker does to Overwatch as a game. Widowmaker's optimal gameplay loop just warps the game being played around her for both teams. You're probably going to look for a position where you can see a lot that also gives you cover, usually on high ground, and it puts the most distance between you and the enemy. It's because of that last part especially that Widowmaker is such a polarizing character map-wise. It's actually because of this that Widowmaker heavily favors Escort and Hybrid over game modes like Control, Push, and especially Flashpoint. Then, once you have your position, you just land as many headshots as you can from there, and you're going to get value. And even if you miss, you will get some value because no one, especially in higher ranks, will peek a Widowmaker because of her threat. As the Widowmaker player, especially on these longer sightlines, landing the headshot provides immense value because that's usually a kill, and if it isn't, a tank just got their health chunked. Or, if you miss, you don't lose much for it because they can't close the gap that fast. Then, you just save your grapple for escaping pressure and you use the Venomine to control a flank or just deter any flanker from attacking you directly, and you use Infrasights whenever, just cause it denies the enemy team from playing the game for 15 seconds, or if they're foolish enough to peek a Widowmaker who can land their shots, they're probably dead. Now, truly the most infuriating thing about Widowmaker is the fact that she is the only character with a consistent one-shot kill. Reinhardt Pin can one-shot you, but it requires him to first pin you and then also land into a wall or charge you off the map, and if you have mobility, you might be able to get back anyway. Sigma has his rock plus primary plus melee, but that means that this longer range tank needs to get up close to one-shot a full health to 50 health target, and they might have the mobility to dodge the rock as well. Roadhog also has an extremely problematic one-shot combo, but it does require him to land his hook and then a headshot and also a melee, and is on a higher cooldown than Widowmaker's headshot while having a shorter max range than Widowmaker's headshot. Junker Queen can one-shot, but it requires her full combo of abilities and for the target hit by the blade to get pulled close enough for all of the follow-up. Hanzo also has the ability to one-shot headshot, but because it is a projectile, this means it has travel time, and because it has travel time, it is inherently less consistent than hitscan. That being said, some people do find Hanzo's inconsistency to be more frustrating than Widowmaker's headshot, but for me personally at least, I find Widowmaker's consistency to be heads above any frustration Hanzo gives me. And for the final one shot, we have a full Zen volley, which has absurd burst, especially with Discord, but it is less consistent because it is a projectile, and it also has a much longer charge time, and it requires a consecutive amount of shots to land. Obviously it sucks to get insta-killed by any of these one-shots, but for most of them, it's highly inconsistent. The most consistent of them are Hanzo and Roadhog, who are also very widely hated by the Overwatch community. I don't think it's any surprise that the characters that rely on these one-shots or high burst, like Roadhog, Hanzo, and Widowmaker, are so frustrating for so much of the player base. Finally, Widowmaker is effectively the longest range character in Overwatch. There are characters that have longer range than she does, but they either have a slower travel time, such as Pharah and Echo, or most of their strength comes from being up close like Mei and Orisa. Again, the only characters that really compete with Widowmaker's longest distance are Ana and Hanzo, and Ana just isn't a DPS, and Hanzo just simply isn't as consistent, especially at those longer ranges. Because of her absurdly long range, especially compared to most other characters in the game, if she is hiding herself well, you don't know where this one-shot is going to be coming from. And this again increases frustration with this one-shot headshot, because she does it from far away, potentially where you don't even know where you're getting shot from until you're already dead. Now, while trying to maintain the theme and identity of a sniper and assassin as a core part of her identity, how can we change Widowmaker to make her less frustrating to play into? One way of reducing frustration towards Widowmaker would be to always show where she's looking while scoped in, at least above like 50% charge, because that's when she actually starts becoming a problem. This reduces frustration because you always know where she's aiming, at least when she's at her most lethal, which is one of her biggest problems. However, if this was the only change, that would just be a flat-out nerf, and it doesn't really change a lot of the issue with her being so heavily reliant on this one-shot headshot for her gameplay. Additionally, just removing the one-shot headshot doesn't make her any better on the maps where she's bad, so she needs to have some sort of change that makes her more consistent on the more congested maps and less consistent, or at least less lethal, on these longer range maps. She should still be better on maps that favor snipers, but she should be viable on maps where she just isn't currently. And I think that the best way of doing this would be to increase more verticality to her. By introducing verticality to her kit, you aren't taking away her ability to play at longer ranges, while giving her the ability to play on more congested maps like Lijiang, Oasis, New Junk City, and Runasapi. This verticality can come in the form of grappling and sticking to a wall like Spider-Man, or like Torb turrets once he has that major perk. Or it can come in a more unique form where she is able to grapple and then rappel up and down, as if she's climbing a ladder. Maybe to make up for this, she has a significantly shorter grapple cooldown, but it doesn't go as far. She has 2 grapple charges with a slightly reduced cooldown. I don't know what the exact numbers would be, but this would allow her to play on these more congested maps, while allowing her to keep this high range. However, now we do need to address the one-shot headshot, and I think that the best way of changing this one-shot headshot while still keeping this whole sniper, assassin, burst damage in one piece is by removing Venomine and adding it to her headshot while reducing the base damage of it. In a way, it should act similarly to Somra's Virus, where if you land a body shot, you deal, let's say, 100 damage and then 50 damage over time. However, if you land the headshot, you double your damage up to 200, and then you deal that 50 damage in a much shorter amount of time. For the record, I don't know if these numbers would be balanced, but these are, I think, good baselines to at least keep an idea of, okay, she is still very lethal, especially to most of the cast, but you have a little bit of time to react to it. I do think it's important to keep the scoped headshot to always one-shot Tracer, and it should give very little time to 225 health targets to respond to it, whereas 250 health targets should have some time to respond to it, but they need active healing to live it, whereas a character like Sim, or if any other character had 275 HP, guess, they'd be able to live it just on very low HP, whereas a character like Bastion would live just fine. Given different damage per seconds for the poison on the headshot, these would be the different times you have to respond as different health targets. Now, I do recognize that a lot of the satisfaction of Widow comes from clicking heads and hearing that elimination sound. It is very satisfying, but I think it's important to have some concessions in order to make Widowmaker a more viable character on more maps while also reducing her frustration. Finally, for her ultimate, it could stay the same. It could also be changed to maybe something like Infrasight is now one of her basic abilities, but it's an extremely short duration on a longer cooldown. Maybe it only gives Widowmaker the information, I don't know. But Infrasight just isn't that compelling of an ultimate, but it does make a lot of sense for her to have that. A new ultimate could be to allow a critical hit area to appear elsewhere on the body instead of it just being a headshot. Or maybe this is just a perk for Infrasight to make it more valuable at lower ranks. Maybe the ultimate allows you to one-shot without the poison, maybe that's just a perk. At the end of the day, I'm kind of spitballing ideas to go alongside this idea of poison alongside a headshot in order to get the kill, while having more verticality and mobility overall to make her better on more maps while keeping this long-range fantasy. So, to wrap it all up, the core issue with Widowmaker is this long-range one-shot, where the most effective counterplay is to just not interact with a Widowmaker until you're on top of her. Her long range just exacerbates this issue of the one-shot, and the more her health has been reduced, it just exacerbates the issue further, where Widowmakers just play these along sightlines and force you to not interact until you're on top of her, which leads to Widowmaker having by far the worst map win rate spread I have ever seen. So, at least in my opinion, the best way to rework Widowmaker without just making her an Ashe clone, who I do believe to be the healthier and more effective sniper in a game like Overwatch, is to lean into a slightly different aspect of her fantasy, which is just the sniper assassin, primarily by removing Venomine and adding it into her shot, which allows you to retain a one-shot, but it allows more counterplay to it, and this also allows more power to be injected into the rest of her kit, which thus allows her to be more viable on more maps, and at least I would think less frustrating because of this change in gameplay. Likely she would still be frustrating, but I think she would be less so with these changes, or at least changes along these lines. That being said, this is just my idea. I don't know if it would work, and it would take a lot of testing to figure that out, but this is just an idea of how Widowmaker could be changed. If you guys have any ideas, I'd be open to hearing them, and I hope that you at least enjoyed trying to think about how you would change Widowmaker while still keeping the core fantasy intact. And hey, if you disagreed with me completely, that's fine too. I'm just trying to throw something out there that would make a character that I personally find infuriating just less frustrating, while still hopefully appealing to the same people that enjoy her current playstyle. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all in the next one.